Envision constructing your life on the promise, then finding out before a judge that the promise was never made. Envision believing your marriage is safe, only to have words uttered that destroy everything. This union may not be valid. That is precisely what occurred to Robyn and Kody Brown in a courtroom shocker that stunned all. For years, they had positioned themselves as the Brown family's legal anchor. But now, in the unforgiving lights of the courtroom, all that they struggled to hold on to disintegrated into suspicion. And in one blinding ruling, the judge brought their whole universe to a standstill. This is not another sister wives meltdown. This is betrayal, scandal, and potentially the destruction of a marriage that defined the entire Brown family legacy. Kody and Robyn spent years weaving the narrative of a love that was not just spiritual but legal too. While his unions with Mary, Christine, and Janelle were spiritual marriages, Robyn was the wife on paper, the one with legal rights. Kody went so far as to divorce Mary, his very first wife, to marry Robyn legally in 2014. At the time, it was spun as an act of sacrifice. "We're doing this for the children," they said. By marrying Robyn, Kody could adopt her kids from a previous marriage, giving them the security of his name and his protection. To fans, it seemed noble. To his wives, it looked like a power shift. And in retrospect, it might have been the most contentious decision in the family's history. But beneath the slick TV smiles, fissures were beginning to show. Christine acknowledged afterwards that she always felt that Robyn was being favored over the others. Janelle, reserved but perceptive, would frequently insinuate that money and loyalty were flowing toward Robyn's side of the family. And Mary, well, Mary was left legally replaced, clinging to shreds of a relationship while being thrust further into the background. For years, fans wondered, was the adoption of Robyn's children truly the complete explanation for the legal marriage? Or was this simply a convenient cover story concealing a larger power play? Those whispers grew more pronounced when rumors of wrongdoing began to surface that documents within the marriage and adoption process had not been finalized properly. At first, it was unthinkable. But once the courts did get involved, the truth became increasingly difficult to deny. The day of the hearing was a good day for good drama, and what everyone had been waiting years for. The climax. The courtroom was filled with lawyers, journalists, and even some members of the Brown family sitting in the back pews, silently observing. The judge's words fell like hammer blows. This marriage may not be legally valid. The room was drawn out of air. Robyn's eyes welled up with tears. Kody's expression tightened, struggling to suppress the panic that flickered in his eyes. For the first time, the man who so often boasted about control seemed helpless. Court filings questioned whether the marriage was legally completed, whether all adoption protocols were followed by the letter, and whether some money disclosures were deliberately left blank. The judge wasn't shy about speaking his mind. Until the legality of the marriage was determined, all that pertained to Kody and Robyn was in limbo. Accounts, assets, properties, and business ventures. For Robyn, it wasn't just about paperwork with the law. It was identity. She had always assumed that she was Kody's rightful partner, the wife with legal standing, the one who had her hand on the future of the family. Now that was eroding. If the marriage wasn't valid, she would no longer be considered the legal wife. She would lose security over Kody's estate, property, and right to inheritance. She could even lose her say in decisions that involved the whole family. As reality set in, Robyn apparently collapsed, telling Kody that she was betrayed by the system. To others who observed, though, this was not about the system. It was about choices made over years, finally catching up to them. The judge's decree shook things up. Until this issue is decided, no assets are to be moved, sold, or changed. This meant no funds could flow, no properties could be accessed, and no business enterprises could proceed unless sanctioned. For a family already stressed by money conflicts, keep in mind the land complications, the relocation to Flagstaff, and the disintegration of polygamy into broken-down families. This was disastrous. Robyn and Kody were stuck in a locked-down empire, unable to maneuver, unable to spin their way out. Meanwhile, the other wives had their own reactions. Christine, who had already parted ways with Kody and was living happily elsewhere, was said to have felt vindicated. She had always maintained that Robyn's presence had destabilized the family. Having the marriage challenged in court was akin to the ultimate validation. Janelle was practical, always concerned with stability and survival. She was fretting about how this freeze would impact her and her kids. Her joint assets with Kody were already complicated. This would only compound the issue. Mary, Robyn's wife who gave up her legal status, sat back and watched the irony play itself out. She had been kept on the periphery all those years after making the very decision that enabled Robyn's marriage. Now the legal wife's role teetered precariously on a thread. The irony was not lost on anyone. This wasn't only about one marriage. If Robyn's legal status was invalid, the whole family structure could implode. Financial planning, ownership of property, even inheritance rights, everything would have to be reviewed. For Kody, it was a nightmare. He had established his contemporary polygamous dynasty on the premise of Robyn being the legal anchor. Without the anchor, his grip faltered. Without legal power, he was merely another man with broken spiritual unions. When news emerged, fans blew up online. Social media was filled with such remarks as karma finally caught up with them. And so Mary gave up her legal marriage for nothing? Some sympathized with Robyn, saying she was just as trapped in Kody's manipulation. Others said she was willingly taking the middle seat, and that was justice. The sister wives community buzzed with theories about what this would mean for the show, the family's finances, and whether Robyn and Kody could recover. The courtroom battle is far from over. Lawyers will dig into paperwork, witnesses may be called, and every decision from the past decade will be re-examined. If the marriage is invalidated, Robyn may stand to lose her legal rights as Kody's wife. The legality of her children's adoption may be called into question. Financial assets may be rearranged, and patriarchal authority may fall apart at the seams. Meanwhile, the judge's freeze holds firm, keeping the Browns in limbo. The erstwhile powerful family, who constructed a reality empire on faith and love, is now beholden to legal niceties. Legal documents. This isn't all about. At the end of the day, it's about a family forged in promises. Promises that were never perhaps actual. The courtroom has peeled off the cameras, the grins, and the spun stories. All that remains is unvarnished truth. Robyn and Kody desired their marriage to be the cornerstone of the Brown family. Now, however, that cornerstone might be nothing more than moving sand. And with the judge's gavel ringing out in that silent courtroom, one thing was for sure. The story of the Brown family will never be the same again. One sentence, that's all it took to turn the world of the Brown family upside down. The judge leaned forward, his voice steady, eyes fixed on the couple seated before him. With a few serene but devastating words, he unwound years of meticulously built family stories. This marriage may not be legally valid. The silence was immediate, chilling. It was the type of silence in which even the sound of a breath too deep seems inappropriate. The lawyers hung suspended mid-note. Journalists in the viewing gallery clutched pens and laptops tightly, knowing history in the making. And at the top of it all were Kody Brown and Robyn Brown, the self-proclaimed power couple of a shattered family. Robyn's face went white. Her eyes flashed quickly, resisting the burn of tears. For years she had held dear the title of being Kody's sole legal wife, the one whose union was documented on paper, not merely in heart. But with the spoken word, the role she had based her life on was put in jeopardy. Next to her, Kody tensed in his seat, jaw set hard, as if preparing for impact. This was not an angry exchange with one of his wives in their home. This was not a camera crew recording his irritations for television. This was a judge. A figure who could take away not only titles but also money, security, and heritage. For the Brown family, the bombshell was no longer about love or heartbreak. It was about legality. It was about truth. And it was about survival. The gavel hadn't even fallen, but tension seemed to hum through the air whenever it made a small noise that resounded. Gasps echoed in the gallery. Gasps and some quick hushed exchanges reverberated across the wooden benches. Did he just say not valid? How is that even possible? To fans who had lived with the Browns for over a decade, it was unimaginable. Robyn and Kody's union had been staged as the family's rock, that one legal connection which made all else secure. Different from spiritual bonds with Mary, Janelle, and Christine, this one would be legitimate, secure, unassailable. But here, in a fluorescent-lit courtroom full of the scent of stale documents, that legitimacy was disappearing. The tone of the judge. The judge did not shout. He did not have to. His steady, measured speech was more effective than a yell could ever be. He outlined how after examining documents and timelines serious doubts had been raised regarding the conclusion of the marriage. There were improprieties. Small, technical but substantial. A missing filing somewhere, an omitted disclosure somewhere else. Individually, they may not be significant. Cumulatively, they created a disturbing portrait. A portrait that suggested this marriage, the very same that Kody divorced a different wife to obtain, might not even qualify under the strict legal measure. And until those problems were sorted out, he explained, the court could have no alternative but to put everything on ice. Robyn's reaction. The words sliced through Robyn like a knife. She swallowed hard, fingers clenched around a tissue she hadn't even known she was clutching. Her chest rose and fell in little ragged breaths. This wasn't about bureaucracy. This was about who she was, where she stood, what she was worth in a family where fight for the attention of Kody had always been sharp. She leaned over toward Kody, whispering something nobody heard, her eyes wide with fear. To her, it was shame. To the other wives watching from the sidelines or hearing accounts afterward, it was poetic justice. Kody's face of stone. Kody, on the other hand, attempted to cover up his shock, but his body was a giveaway. His otherwise expressive gestures were absent. His hands rested stiff on the table, knuckles white as a cob. His jaw clenched at each sentence from the bench. For years his power had rested on the shoulders of Robyn's legality. She was the paper wife, the document signatory, the one who could borrow and buy property. She was his translator in the world outside. If that fell apart, his whole universe of domination fell apart with it. The gallery's murmurs behind them, the gallery of the courtroom, undulated in reaction. There were a few gasps followed by soft mutterings. Reporters were frantically typing, hoping to be the first to break the story. One woman shook her head in amazement, and a man turned to his neighbor, whispering, "This is the story of the year." The air was charged, thick with the sort of drama that is typically reserved for television shows. But this wasn't on TV. This was live, raw, and happening in the moment. The freeze order, and then there was the second punch. All joint assets, accounts and properties related to this marriage are hereby frozen pending further notice. That one decision was a sledgehammer. It stated money couldn't flow, houses couldn't sell, deals couldn't get signed. All financial choices involving Kody and Robyn were instantly put on hold. For a family already struggling with broken loyalties and stretched finances, this wasn't merely an annoyance. It was a disaster. Why it was so shocking. In order to know why the room responded with such passion, you must recall the background. This wasn't some marriage under the microscope. This was the sole legal marriage in a family based on polygamy. It was the ground Kody had relied on to excuse thousands of choices, relocating states, splitting property, organizing finances. For the other wives, who had been reduced to only spiritual bonds, this discovery hit close to home. They had spent years wondering where they stood with Robyn, criticized Kody for playing favorites, and seen their own relationships with him fall apart. Now, out of the blue, the same marriage that had made them feel secondary was in jeopardy. The irony was harsh. The emotional fallout. As the judge moved on to other procedural matters, the Browns sat in silence, their world quietly unraveling. Robyn dabbed her eyes, trying to keep composure but failing. Kody stared straight ahead, refusing to meet anyone's gaze, as though focusing on a distant point could hold the collapsing walls in place. The judge did not render a verdict that day, but he did not have to. The harm was done. In one pronouncement, he had revealed the possibility that the Brown family crown jewel, the legal marriage that was going to elevate them, was a brittle illusion. And as the gavel finally fell, closing the session, the room erupted once more. Reporters rushed for the doors. Observers shook their heads in shock. Somewhere in the gallery shadows, a voice mouthed the words everyone was thinking, "If this isn't valid, then what was all of it for?" One sentence, only one, was enough to tear the heart out of the Brown family's tale. The judge leaned forward, papers neatly piled in front of him, and spoke in a calmness that cut cleaner than any scream. "This marriage may not be legally valid." Those words did not simply ring out in that antiseptic courtroom. They boomed through years of family history, through the artfully constructed story, Robyn and Kody had created, and through the hearts of millions of followers who believed that they already knew the truth. Robyn's lips quivered. She blinked her eyes quickly, as if every blink would jolt her awake from this dream. Next to her, Kody attempted to keep his face impassive, his eyes fixed in that stern patriarchal scowl he had mastered for the cameras. But his fists, gripped so tightly the knuckles were white, gave him away. The courtroom itself appeared to catch its breath. A couple of whispers played through the gallery. Not valid? How is that possible? Journalists crouched over their laptops, already on the lookout for a headline that would burst onto every entertainment portal in America. It was not merely a technicality within a court of law, it was a public expose. An expose that had the potential to bring down the entire basis of the Browns' empire. And to really grasp why this moment was so ruinous, you have to look back to the choice that transformed everything. The courtroom bombshell wasn't a sudden surprise. It was the culmination of years of decisions, sacrifices, and silent suspicions that had forever lingered just beneath the surface of the sister wives drama. When Robyn joined the family in 2010, she was introduced as the new chapter in the Browns' polygamous saga. Kody then had 3 wives: Mary, Janelle, and Christine. They had established their lives as a family through decades of faithfulness, struggle, and compromise. Mary, the initial wife, had the sole legal marriage to Kody. That legal marriage counted. It was security in the eyes of the law, even if the world didn't accept their polygamy. With Robyn, however, all that changed. She arrived as a single mother of 3 from a prior marriage. She was younger, teary-eyed, and fragile, and Kody was smitten. On camera, viewers could notice the difference. The way he glanced at her, the way he stood up for her, the way his voice softened around her. To the other wives, it wasn't covert. By 2014, the choice was made. Kody would legally divorce Mary in order to marry Robyn. At the time, the Browns provided one explanation. They maintained the legal divorce and subsequent marriage were only so that Kody could adopt Robyn's 3 children. The biological father of the children was no longer in the picture, and the adoption would provide them with legal stability, his surname, and the assets of being fully a member of the family. It sounded noble. It sounded selfless. On television, it even brought tears. Mary agreed, though painfully, to step aside. Kody and Robyn framed it as a sacrifice for the children, not for themselves. And for years, that's the story fans accepted. But now, years later, the courtroom was shining a light into the shadows, and what it revealed made that noble narrative look suspiciously thin. Insiders say Mary's decision was far from voluntary. Although she consented on camera, she later confessed that she had felt trapped. For decades, she was Kody's sole legal wife. To surrender, that meant losing the last vestige of her security, and yet she did it for Robyn, for the children, for the family's reputation. Christine never showed her feelings. She always thought Kody treated Robyn differently, more gently, more lovingly. The legal marriage just reinforced that. She would tell them she felt invisible beside Robyn, like her decades with Kody counted for less than Robyn's brief stint at his side. Janelle, the quieter of the two, but also practical, did not cry or rage. But even she, years later, admitted the balance of the family changed radically. Robyn was no longer just a wife, but the wife, the one who was officially important in the outside world. For all 3 of them, the adoption story seemed like a convenient cover, a justification for a choice that, in reality, was really about lifting Robyn up and cementing her as Kody's number 1. And that's precisely where the courtroom cracks began. The judge said that the documents related to Kody and Robyn's marriage, and even aspects of the adoption, had been problematic. Some of the filings were hasty. Others were incomplete. Some legally mandated disclosures might not have been filed. Separately, they could have been written off as clerical mistakes. But collectively, they pointed to something larger, that Kody and Robyn's legal marriage may not have been correctly sealed. If that were the case, then the children's adoption would be open to scrutiny. The passing of assets and properties that are linked with Robyn's legal status could be challenged, and the basis of her power within the family would be undermined. This discovery wasn't just about a single relationship. It was about the whole Brown dynasty. Mary's sacrifice. If the marriage wasn't valid, then Mary's legal divorce had been pointless. She had given up her one position of security for nothing. The children's security. If the adoption paperwork was compromised, then Robyn's kids might not have the protection and legitimacy they were promised. Financial control. For years, all property, loan, and business decisions flowed through Robyn since she was the lawful wife. If that changed, so did her control of the family's finances. It was a chain reaction that would undo years of decisions. That's why the judge's words came as a bombshell. He wasn't alleging Kody or Robyn had committed fraud yet, but he was making something very clear. The court could not proceed as if business were usual. Unless and until the marriage was established to be valid, all joint property and all money choices would be put on hold. That made the Browns' cash untouchable, their real estate unsellable, their contracts put on hold. And for a family already overwhelmed by emotional breakdowns and financial stress, that freeze was nothing short of disastrous. At that point, Robyn's masterfully constructed public persona started to crack. She had always been seen as the emotional center of the family, the one who desires harmony, who cries for everyone to come together. But those tears tended to sound hollow to fans who observed that while she cried, she increasingly gained more and more control. Now bereft of certainty, her tears seemed different. They weren't about unity. They were about survival. She grabbed Kody's arm, whispering wildly, eyes scanning the room as if searching for an exit. This was not the Robyn who had come into the family years before with gentle innocence. This was a woman observing the very ground of her existence being yanked out from beneath her feet. For Kody, the shock was deeper. He had constructed his contemporary polygamous utopia around the legality of Robyn. To him, she was not only a wife, she was the anchor, the one who legitimized his structure in the outside world. Without that, what was there? 3 ex-wives who had moved away or drawn apart. 1 legal marriage now on shaky ground. A money empire frozen by court decree. For the first time, maybe, Kody had looked powerless. And that was the biggest surprise of all. The moment of silence. The gavel hadn't even fallen, but the words themselves were suffused with finality. Until the validity of this marriage is established in full, all financial and legal transactions related to the Brown estate will be frozen. That one sentence sent a silent shiver down the courtroom. The ensuing silence was not tranquil, it was choking. You could practically hear the simultaneous straining of throats, the ragged breathing of a family who realized their carefully spun fabric was coming undone. Robyn sat rigid, her fingers clenched so tightly on her lap that the knuckles shone white. Kody rested forward in his seat, lips pinched, eyes narrowed, his thoughts obviously racing. He wasn't a man to be denied. And yet here, before the nation's eyes, he had no option but to sit and hear the judge tear down the fortress he believed he had constructed. To anyone else, the judge's directive might ring as a brief inconvenience. But to the Browns, it was apocalyptic. A freeze on assets isn't a delay, it's a lock. It means bank accounts can't be touched. Even joint savings, family money, or business income are locked down. Properties can't be sold, remortgaged, or borrowed against. Each home, each parcel of land, each loan against Kody and Robyn's lawful marriage fell into the court's hands. Contracts are delayed, reality show payments, business deals, and even minor endorsements based on their lawful existence couldn't proceed without approval. Briefly, their empire was not merely on hold, it was encased in ice, with no prospects for melting. The Browns were not an average family, they were not simply spouses and kids. They were a brand, a public image of plural marriage, a reality TV dynasty. And the freeze jeopardized every facet of that identity. Mary's anguish, sitting in the gallery, Mary's eyes filled with tears. For years, she had watched her own legal status sacrificed for Robyn's benefit. Now she knew, it had all been for nothing. The bitter irony struck her harder than anyone else. She had surrendered her marriage so Kody could marry Robyn, and now even that marriage might not legally exist. Christine's "I told you so." Despite having moved far from Kody by this point, even she couldn't help but notice the enormity of the moment. Friends who were close to her later reported she murmured to herself, "This is what happens when you build a house on lies." Janelle's practical panic. To Janelle, the lockdown wasn't emotional. it was survival. Bills, mortgage payments, debts, taxes, all necessitated fluid access to funds. With all locked away, she could already sense the money stranglehold closing in on the family's throat. And Robyn, the woman who once wept for harmony, for tranquility, for safekeeping of her children, this was the horror that she had worked to avoid for years. Her smile, though arranged for the benefit of the cameras, betrayed in her trembling lips and nervous eyes. In control had been the foundation of his identity. He controlled the family story, the financial decisions, even the religious path of the home. But standing in that courtroom, his authority was cut from him in one swift motion. He leaned across to his lawyer, quietly furious, jabbing at the air with his finger. The one standing near enough could overhear bits of his anger. Unbelievable. This is not fraud. Years of paperwork, adoption already completed. The lawyer's stern reply only seemed to infuriate him more. For the first time, Kody did not appear to be the self-assured patriarch, but a cornered man. The judge was not harsh, but he was adamant. He said that this had nothing to do with feelings or even with polygamy. It had to do with legal integrity. Records of Kody and Robyn's marriage and adoption filings that followed were in conflict. Missing signatures, late filings, and mysterious amendments implied the possibility of mismanagement, or worse, deliberate tampering. Until this court can ascertain with complete certainty that the marriage is legally valid, the judge stated firmly, all assets and financial transactions associated with it will be frozen. This court will not take any chances at further complications until clarity is reached. It was not an accusation. It was a warning. Outside the courthouse, the rumor of the day flashed in instant headlines. Robyn and Kody's marriage under question. Brown family finances frozen amid legal drama. Judge drops bombshell in sister wives case. Reporters rushed to obtain reactions. Followers flocked to social media, half in shock, half delighted. For years, many had harbored suspicions that Robyn's marriage to Kody was not as straightforward or as altruistic as presented. Now, they had a courtroom confirmation. Twitter threads, TikTok explainers, YouTube analyses, every corner of the internet was aglow with speculation. Was the marriage ever legal? Would the adoption be reversed? Was this the final karmic payback for generations of family betrayal? Behind the drama, the true consequence of the freeze was abrupt and agonizing. Groceries and bills, with accounts frozen, even routine everyday expenses became a nightmare. Debit cards were rejected. Bills accumulated. The family, accustomed to a constant stream of TV money and pooled funds, found the ground suddenly give way beneath them. Properties in limbo. Their houses, many still mortgaged, were now trapped in legal quagmire. Refinancing to meet expenses, forget it. Selling to downsize, not on the agenda. Even paying property taxes was muddled. College money and medical expenses, some of the kids relied on those accounts for school or medical care. With money tied up, parents had to scramble to find other solutions. For the first time, the kids who had suffered so much of their parents' drama, suffered collateral damage. While she attempted to remain calm, Robyn did finally break down. In a soft but shaking voice, she spoke to the judge. Your Honor, please, this is not fair to the children. This marriage was for them. The adoption was for them. They don't deserve to have their lives disrupted because of paperwork. Her voice cracked on the last word, resonating through the room. But the judge was unfazed. Mrs. Brown, the court is not punishing your kids. The court is making sure the law has been complied with. The best interests of the children will be taken into account. But this court cannot disregard potential improprieties with legal documents. Robyn's tears fell fast. Kody put a hand on her back. But even his reassurance felt forced, more of a gesture than real. This moment didn't simply lock up money. It locked up people. Mary pulled further away, seeing her sacrifice had been for nothing. Christine was released from the marriage, but still bound to its heritage, and she got dark pleasure out of the disintegration. Janelle, ever practical, had survival on her mind, but her tolerance for Kody's rule dwindled to zero. And Robyn, once the center of Kody's universe, now she seemed the weak link. The lawful wife who could be no wife at all. At the end of the hearing, Kody's mask of confidence had broken. He knew what was at risk. His leadership, his reputation, his money, his legacy, Everything hung in the balance of this legal freeze. And as the judge adjourned, Kody rose abruptly, scraping the chair back across the floor. His jaws clenching, heaving in his chest, he grunted under his breath. This isn't over. But to all who watched, his wives, his children, the world beyond, the end was already beginning. The courtroom doors closed behind the Browns, but the reverberations of the judge's decision clung to their heels in the form of a chilling ghost. One by one, the wives filed out, not as a single family unit, but as four independent islands, growing farther apart. Each bore her own tempest within. Cameras clicked, photographers yelled, but the most revealing moment was not what they cried out, it was what they left unspoken. Robyn gripped her handbag, as if it were a lifeline, her cheeks flushed with tears. Kody strode in front of her, shoulders rigid, refusing to look up from the floor. And following close behind them, the other wives filed silently, their eyes piercing, their hearts heavier than ever. What had once been sold as a tale of faith and unity was now falling apart into regret, betrayal, and hard survival instincts. Mary was silent that day, but in her head, the thoughts cried out louder than any headline plastered on the outside of the courthouse. She recalled it all too well, the day she gave up her legal marriage to Kody so he could wed Robyn. She had convinced herself it was for the kids, that it was the honorable thing to do. Kody had assured her, vowed that nothing would change between them. It's just paperwork, he had told her. But since the years that had passed, everything was different. Her position in Kody's life dwindled until she was only an afterthought. And now, to learn that the marriage she gave up everything for could even be invalid, it was a sore turned raw with salt added to it. As Mary descended the courthouse steps, she muttered under her breath, I gave up everything for nothing. To some she looked defeated, to others she looked freed, because sometimes realizing you've lost it all is the first step in finally letting go. While Mary drowned in heartbreak, Janelle's mind churned with numbers, bills, and survival plans. The freeze was not a curiosity of the law to her, it was an economic earthquake. She considered the mortgages, the taxes, the daily requirements of her children. If everything was frozen in place, how many days would it be before the cracks opened wide into complete breakdown? Janelle had always been the wife who equated idealism with practicality. While Kody dreamed, she budgeted. While Robyn wept, she plotted. And now she knew precisely what this freeze meant. The family was broke in all the ways that count. Standing in the parking lot, Janelle pulled out her phone and scrolled through her bank app. Declined transactions, pending payments, red alerts flashing across her screen. She shook her head and muttered, we're in deeper trouble than he's willing to admit. She wasn't angry, she wasn't crying, she was planning. Because if there was one thing Janelle knew, it was how to survive when everyone else was falling apart. Christine wasn't supposed to be there anymore. She had walked away from Kody, from the marriage, from the constant cycle of pain, but she still carried ties, children, memories, scars that never fully healed. And so, when the judge issued the freeze, Christine felt something she hadn't felt in years: vindication. For so long she had sounded the alarm about the family's imbalance, the favoritism, the precedence the marriage of Robyn had been accorded over the others. She had pleaded for fairness, for harmony. Nobody had listened. Now, the law itself was crying out the imbalance. Yet, vindication was tinged with sadness. Christine glanced at Robyn, at the tears running down her face, and thought, this is what you do when you make your happiness someone else's heartbreak. She wasn't being cruel. She wasn't gloating. She was done. Done fighting, done sacrificing, done pretending. And for the first time she understood she was no longer the broken one. Kody was for Robyn. The judge's freeze was not just a ruling. It was an identity crisis. She had invested years in maintaining that her marriage would be the glue to keep the Browns together. She had been such a strong defender of it, presented it as something that was necessary, as something heroic. She was the lawful wife, the anchor, the one who gave legality to their lifestyle before the eyes of the law. And now the anchor was uncertain. As the cameras trailed after her out of the courthouse, she hid her face in her hands. The woman who had cried for oneness was now crying for survival. She whispered to Kody, shaking, what if they undo everything? What if the kids lose everything? But Kody didn't respond. He couldn't. His silence spoke louder than words ever could do. Later that night, rumors crept out. Insiders close to the family said the wives fought behind closed doors, their voices getting raised in ways the public never saw. Mary confronted Robyn. "I gave up my marriage for you, and for what? So we could all be humiliated like this?" Janelle pushed Kody. "What's the plan, Kody? You can't just say trust me anymore. We're out of time." Christine, while aloof, allegedly sent a glass-cutting message. "You wanted Robyn as your only wife? Now you have her, and only her." The fallout wasn't financial. It was about years of anger spilling over. The judge's freeze hadn't caused the cracks. It had just revealed them under the brightest possible spotlight. What made the fallout so sad was that the children, as ever, were in the crossfire. Some of the older children, who were already questioning Kody and Robyn's decision, went on social media, writing passive-aggressive comments and likes on posts taunting the situation. Others remained quiet, afraid of being pulled back into the limelight that they never requested. But for the little kids, particularly Robyn's, fear and confusion reigned. Their security had forever rested on the notion that their parents' marriage was real. Now, even that basis was crumbling. A family friend summed it up this way: "The kids don't comprehend the legalities. They just recognize something is amiss. And they're terrified." As the wives struggled in seclusion, the world gawked in public. Fans argued vociferously online, some sided with Christine and Janelle, saying this was karma long overdue. Others sympathized with Robyn, insisting she was only ever trying to protect her children. A smaller group defended Kody, arguing the system was biased against polygamists. But regardless of the spin, one reality was inescapable. The family brand was irreparably tarnished. Each tear, each whispered secret, each front-page headline was another nail hammered into the coffin of their formerly glossy reputation. And then there was Kody. In the fallout, his silence became more and more oppressive. He didn't rage as much anymore. He didn't argue or protest as fiercely. Instead, he stewed in a silent rage, his pride seeping out in secret. The man who had been the public face of polygamy was now the public face of failure, financially, emotionally, and spiritually. Even among the wives, one thing was certain: Kody was no longer a leader. He was a liability. After the dust settled that day, each of the wives was at her own crossroads. Mary questioned whether it was time to finally leave for good. Janelle considered whether her allegiance was worth her economic survival. Christine celebrated her freedom, with no intention of ever looking back. Robyn held onto the remnants of a marriage that may never have been legally valid. The aftermath wasn't merely the result of a judge's decision, it was about the finality of the demise of a family unit that had been on shaky ground for decades. The freeze merely compelled them all to acknowledge it. And although they left the courthouse that day, they knew they weren't leaving each other. Not yet. The fight was just starting. And the cuts would only grow deeper from here. When the gavel came down in that Nevada courtroom, the shockwaves didn't stop at the courthouse steps. They radiated outward like ripples on water, first through reporters, then social media, and ultimately through living rooms in America. By that night, the Browns were not merely a family in trouble. They were a front page, a hashtag, a trending topic. Television news anchors pronounced their names with a combination of awe and sympathy. Commentators theorized ad infinitum: was Robyn ever truly Kody's wife? Did the family perpetuate a fraud? What becomes of their wealth now that the funds are frozen? What had started out as a personal hurt had mushroomed into public accountability. And whereas the professionally choreographed scenes of their reality show, no matter how painful, could be scripted and controlled, this was real-time, live and beyond control. On Facebook, Reddit, TikTok, and YouTube, fans overnight became amateur sleuths. Past clips went viral. The episode where Mary wept as she relinquished her legal marriage. The moment where Christine claimed she felt relegated. Robyn's insistent repetitions that her marriage to Kody was the real one. Each tear, each verbal slip, each look of distress was re-examined in the wake of the Bombshell ruling. Fans drew lines, constructed timelines, and revealed contradictions the Browns had hoped would remain in the ground. It was all there the entire time, one popular post said. We just didn't want to believe it. By day 2, big media had caught wind of it. Some sensationalized it as a scandal, splashing sensational headlines. Brown family marriage hoax, Robyn's union with Kody under fire. Court freezes family empire in Bombshell move. Some put a more serious perspective on it, calling it a tragedy of love, faith, and shattered promises. Some documentarians wondered if perhaps this would be the final ending to polygamy on TV. The Browns were no longer just a family. They were a case study. Every word was analyzed, their silence read as guilt, and their history reinterpreted as staging for this. If anyone surprised the public during those weeks, it was Mary. For years, she had been the quiet one, the forgotten wife, the woman in the background. But in the wake of the freeze, Mary came forward, not angrily, but with a weary kind of honesty. In a live interview, she spoke softly. "I believed I was doing the right thing. I believed giving up my marriage was a loving thing to do. But in retrospect now, I don't know if it was love or if it was fear, and perhaps it was both." Her vulnerability resonated. For the first time in a long time, her fans came to her defense, filling her socials with messages of support. Some went so far as to declare her the real survivor of the Brown saga. Meanwhile, Mary was finding her voice, and Janelle was remaining quiet. At least initially, she refused to be interviewed, brushed off paparazzi, and concentrated on her entrepreneurial pursuits. But in private, she was negotiating, according to sources, quietly promising lawyers, plotting financial independence, and carefully separating herself from the devastation. For Janelle, the standoff wasn't about betrayal or shame, it was about survival. And she knew survival wasn't one with on-camera tears. It was one with contracts, bank balances, and tough decisions. Christine, on the other hand, appeared to be almost above reprisal. Already established in her new life, she smiled, radiant in interviews, and above all free. Upon being questioned regarding the ruling, she provided a tempered response. "All I can say is I left when I knew it was time. What happens now doesn't surprise me. It only makes me grateful I chose a different path." Her quiet confidence established her as the people's darling during the backlash. She was viewed by fans as vindicated, a woman who had left a dying empire before it fell on her. Robyn, on the other hand, felt the full force of the tempest. For years, she had been depicted as the favorite wife, the one most favored by Kody's affections. But now, the story darkened. She was the legal wife, whose union may never have been legal to begin with. Headlines indicted her for manipulation. Fans indicted her for greed. Even some members of her family, off the record, suggested she had driven the wedge that drove them all apart. Robyn pleaded her case, frequently tearfully, that she had only wanted stability for her kids. But the more she said, the less others believed. Her tears seemed to the public like spin, and her rationales sounded like excuses. And then there was Kody. The man who had strutted so proudly as the head of a plural family was now depicted as a failed politician, a faltering icon of ego and bad judgment. He attempted to fight back, deeming the ruling unreasonable and claiming the family was being singled out, but his spittle-flecked tirades did not impress. The angrier he became, the more the public perceived desperation instead of strength. The irony was savage. Kody had always sought validation, always insisted the world view his family as a shining example of faith and determination. Now the validation had arrived. But for all the wrong reasons. All beyond the theatrics, the legal landscape was bleak. Assets frozen, attorneys descended like vultures. Every dollar, every property, every business was investigated. Questions abounded. Would Robyn's marriage be dissolved? Would the family be charged with misrepresentation? Could creditors swoop in and take everything? For the Browns, the future wasn't just unpredictable, it was horrifying. They weren't battling for reputation anymore. They were battling for survival as weeks turned into months. The world that watched them divide into camps. Team Christine and Janelle, supporters who viewed them as fearless women who broke the mold. Team Mary, sympathizers who felt she had been sacrificed and gagged. Team Robyn, the smaller but vocal faction, who insisted she was unfairly villainized. Team Kody, dwindling but devoted, frequently invoking religious freedom and government encroachment. This split only served to stoke the media sideshow. Talk shows, podcasts, and YouTube shows endlessly debated, making the Browns a cautionary tale and cultural phenomenon. So what's next for the Browns? For some, it means reinvention. Christine thrives in her independence. Janelle rebrands herself as a businesswoman. Mary starts speaking openly, building a following of women who see themselves in her story. For others, it means clinging to fragments. Robyn fights to defend her marriage, her reputation, her children's stability. Kody, ever defiant, tries to rally, but finds fewer and fewer standing behind him. And for the public, it means more questions than answers. Will there be new revelations in court? Will the wives finally go their separate ways for good? Will the empire they built on television collapse completely, or rise again, in some new form? No matter what happens next, one truth is already written: the Brown family will never again be what it once was. The courtroom bombshell didn't freeze assets. It froze the illusion. The curtain was yanked back. The expertly constructed myth shattered, and the world glimpsed the Browns not as an ideal family, but as a fragile one, shattered by jealousy, partiality, and decisions no longer masked. And yet, amidst that wreckage, there was something unmistakably human. Their pride, their pain, their fall. It wasn't merely a scandal, it was a reflection, a shining mirror to the messy, imperfect ways love and devotion can come apart at the seams. So as the Browns enter their most uncertain chapter ever, one question hangs over all. When all is stopped, love, money, trust, beyond whom will the ice eventually crack?